made in my life. I learned a
I'm
lot
back.
about China. I hear the
You know
critiques of
what?
this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I
Oh,
guarantee you he wouldn't
right
be
back.
praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or with being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just
America's
to follow
coach.
up on that, the question
We're
was,
starting a whole
can
new
you
clip now.
explain the
No, just
discrepancy?
This is the other
Like I said,
half
I'm
of
disclosed. I got there that summer
what I'm
and
following.
misspoke on this, so I will just. That's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protest went in. And
Yeah.
from that, I learned a
He now
lot
gets to the
of
question.
what needed to be in governance.
Thank you, Governor.
Yeah.
Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest
Yeah, let's hear
office,
this
and you said
one.
He could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain
Vance
to the
did
American
pick a
people
perfect red
where I
tie.
come down on the issues and what changed. Now,
It's that
you pointed
perfect
out the
shade
messages
of
from
Republican
2020.
red.
Margaret, I've been extremely consistent.
Just not
that I think there were a
perfect
lot
red.
of things that we could have done better
And
in the Trump administration. The
Walz
first
picked the
round,
perfect blue.
if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Well,
Thank you.
nice close there,
Now the
JD
issue of
Vance.
reproductive rights.
Uh-oh.
Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade. 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, there's trolls in the
Amanda
live
Zaworski would disagree
thread,
with you on
but
it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. and that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child, raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being
Amen. Amen.
The catch-all on this is well, the states
Go,
decide
Tim. I
what's
agree.
right for
Comment
Texas
section
might
over
not be
here.
Right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic.
I can't wait to hear Vance. He's gulping over there, Vance.
Mortality.
I saw a gulp.
In Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world.
Yeah, it is sickening to see grown men talking about women's rights, but at least Tim Walz is speaking
Senator, do you
truth.
want to respond to the
Now,
governor's
Vance,
bill? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood.
I'm 34 years old,
young women who had
and I'm sitting here watching men that are, well, one who's 40 and the other who's in his 60s.
And you know, one of them is actually very dear to
And
me.
I'd rather
And I know she's
entrust in the
watching
60-year-old than the
tonight, and I love you.
40-year-old.
And she told me something a couple of years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive
While I was
relationship.
talking,
And I think that what
Vance
I
said
take from
something.
that
Let me
as
go
a-
back. Go back just a few seconds.
everything that I've ever said on this topic. And you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And you know, one of them is actually very dear to me, and I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy, and I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
But we don't need to be divided. We need to stand united.
Made the accusation
I mean,
true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state.
Yeah, Vance totally deflected that. Like, he's basically saying, oh, it's nothing I'm going to say I've got the right to say. Let the states, the senators, and the women and the people in there, even though he knows it won't be the women's voices being heard, it will just be a bunch of, essentially, you know, men making the decision, which is a woman's greatest concern as a man. And thank you.
In Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that.
Straight to the point
I
there.
think referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported.
No, I don't do no drugs, but Tim Walz just does that. Like, maybe it's an itch.
If someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did, when I was running for Senate in 2022, talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that.
Pro-women.
Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things to try
to Vance does have eyeliner.
Pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion. That's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was.
Well, that's nice. That's nice.
You're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on
it's true. It is true.
On this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So that hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget, Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
Amen to that.
Governor, you gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to.
That was good. That was good.
News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
Okay. So they're gonna do a quick skip ahead, and all I gotta do is basically like skip a few seconds ahead because they're just talking about earthquake in Turkey. I'm still alive. Just a quick, like. Okay, now we're in commercial. I'm live, baby. I'm live. That's what it says. I mean, that's Apple for you. Well, not Apple. That's Disney. Disney Live. That's why I pay for my Disney. Disney keeps me connected with the world. Because Disney owns everything now, including ABC News. Yeah, Hulu, Disney, Fire TV, Roku. Anyway, but, you know, I'm seeing this debate as something crucial. And Brian Tyler Cohen's not talking right now, but the chat's lit up. That little break I had in the middle of my recording was because I hit the button on my phone, so I apologize. But, you know, so far in this whole entire debate, JD Vance is being cordially nice. I noticed to Tim Walz. Tim Walz is being cordially very on point with disproving all of that niceness that I think that JD Vance is trying to like sugarcoat and coat over all the things about him and Trump and trying to make Trump look like this kind of like, you know, essentially not onto this whole Project 2025. It totally deflected from all those questions. He never even once mentioned the Project 2025. I'm talking about JD Vance. Tim Walz outright pointed out that accusation straight at JD Vance, and he just totally deflected from it. It's pretty sad when you've got two candidates on stage and one candidate's, primary presidential pick is not even clearly the right choice, but then you have your vice president trying to make it sound like the vice president pick, trying to make it sound like that essentially he's the golden shining apple boy to his general future. You know, like he's perfect to. I can actually pause this. Oh wait, that's not a good point to pause. Oh, that's a good point to pause. There we go. So yeah, like I'm seeing a lot of convoluted, back and forth. JD Vance is just trying to sugarcoat it. He's trying to put that picture of his wife and kids. He's trying to essentially make everything look all cordial and sweet talking with Tim Walz. Trying to put his whole past as an Iraq veteran to heart, to try to reach out to a lot of veterans and people at home that have family members in service. It's a nice touch, but JD Vance is mostly just deflecting a lot of nonsense from his own points of view, from what I think is mostly from his podcast. I've never actually watched JD Vance's podcast. It's the only reason I'm even watching this now is just to see like a refreshing update on, as hard as it is for me to really try to stay up till 10. Generally trying to see, not so much to seal my conviction on what I feel the right candidate would be, but more so, most importantly, even like with the comment section, it's all about talking about the fact that, you know, even since the debate started, even the comments right there, they're like, what time did it start? It started at 9 o'clock. Tim Walz is still, keeping a very clean flow there. And even though he's being super nice, JD Vance's method is to be nice in the contradictive sense, to try to make it look like he's this picture-perfect male candidate for the Republican Party that's all for the American people, just because of his background service as a military service person who served in Iraq, which we can all commend him for. There's a lot of Iraq veterans, but that's not the main thing that makes you a viable, perfect candidate. Just because you served our country and you served in a war that not everybody agreed with, you fought and served, this is not the time to be bringing this up in this current day and age. The greatest threats that we're facing is the future of the economy, people's needs and their hurts and their hearts and struggling. Even I'm struggling. And I'm thinking every day, how can I improve people's lives? I try to bring the news on my own YouTube channel just like this and do my part. And here I am pushing myself to stay up late when some people are just like, you know what, I'll just watch this later. So you guys get to see my live reaction now, and we're going to see if they're back into the debate here. Hold on a second. That was just Dr. Odyssey and more side news. Dancing with the Stars. And then back to the debate. Nope. We're still on. Oh, there we go. Okay, hold on. Go back. Oh. Wait. Okay, so after this, now we're back to the debate. After a couple of these last bits of advertisements. So we're gonna see what the vice presidential debate candidates get into now in this. I guess we're in the midway segment here.
Welcome back to the CBS News Vice
vice presidential debate.
Of course, I paused so I could talk to you guys. And now we're the gun violence. Gun violence.
Of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Laura, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their faces.
Yes, what an intense part from the break. I have to agree with the chat.
A lot of kids are going to experience
Talk
this
about
terrible
shooting
epidemic of gun violence.
schools and guns.
Our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff, and we do have
Terrible
to do
stuff?
better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually
Talk about like
agree that we need
an
to do
epidemic,
better on this. The question
an
is just
ongoing
how we
epidemic.
actually do it.
It's not just stuff.
Now,
These are
here's
people's
something
lives.
that really bothers
That's
me
a little
and worries
insensitive
me
there,
about
Mr. Vance.
This epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90%, and some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained
your kids,
firearms.
Vance,
And
are
while we're on
not
that
subject
topic,
to this,
we know
so
that thanks to Kamala Harris's open
maybe you
border,
should use
we've
them
seen a
as an
massive
example. You
influx in
care
number
for
of
the
illegal
kids because
guns
your kids
run
are
by
seeing
the
this
Mexican
too.
drug cartel. So that number, the amount of illegal guns
Talking
in our
about
country is
90% of
higher
gun
today
violence is
than it
seen
was
because
3.5
of
years ago. But what do we
Mexican
do about
gun
the schools? What do we do to protect our
cartel.
kids? And I think the answer
What?
is,
What does that have to
and
do
I say
with?
this, not loving the answer.
And the funny thing is,
I
over
don't
here in the
want my
chat,
kids to go to
since you guys know I
school
paused,
in a school that
I'm
feels
behind the
unsafe
comment
or where
section.
there are
Comment
visible
section's
signs of
ahead
security.
with the debate.
But I unfortunately think that we
So I'm
have
actually
to
seeing
increase security
points
in our
before
schools. We have to
I
make
see
the
it
doors
myself.
lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan
Resource
solutions
officers in
for how to
schools
do
would
that.
be helpful.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Now, Tim Walz.
I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and
Okay, he's going straight to the connection.
At a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress.
Well, thank you, JD
I
Vance.
sat
Awful. Nice
in my
comment.
office,
Good.
surrounded by dozens
First
of
thing you said that made
parents,
sense.
and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and I here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things
This is very
that
true.
we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your gun right now.
Vance gulped.
Do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go when we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills? They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still
Amen to that.
and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
It does break my heart.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that you're doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland is, okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get.
I know where most of it comes from.
Because I don't think it's the whole
Hey
reason
kids, you want a phone when you're,
you know,
5 years old?
It's a big piece of it.
Maybe 4?
Another driver of
Yeah, so you can watch adult stories
and,
and,
that affecting our kids. It doesn't
you know,
earn as
learn
many
about the world,
headlines, but is the terrible
stress
gun
about
violence
real
problem
life.
in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is talking about cities and where it's at.
They're calling him a grown Chucky Doll Vance.
Where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns.
Resource officers in schools is a good thing.
But I do think that this is one.
Taking the guns,
a healthy conversation.
like assault rifles,
dangerous
dangerous assault rifles. Yeah, there should be stricter rules.
That's our priority.
Maybe not a
Thank
ban,
you,
but
Margaret.
maybe
Thank
bump
you, Mark.
stocks.
Let's turn now to the top
You know.
contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing
inflation.
and rent.
Here we
There's
get
a
into
shortage of
this.
more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz.
Yes,
the
comments
Harris
like, is it
campaign
over?
promises a $25,000
Yes. Talk about
down
children
payment
shooting guns.
assistance for
That's all
first-time
over now.
home
We're talking about
buyers
inflation.
and a $10,000 tax
I mean,
credit.
it should be more
They
important to
also
keep
promise
talking about it,
to
but
build 3 million
I mean,
new
I would
homes.
talk about it.
Where are you
I have
building
good
these homes,
ideas.
and won't handing out that
Resource
kind of
officers.
money just drive up prices
Yeah, I'm all
higher?
for resource
No, it's not
officers
handing
in
out.
schools.
First, let me say this issue of housing.
It's been proven
Those of
resource
you listening on
officers,
this, the problem we
provided
have
a
is
municipal police
that we've
officer
got a
can
lot of folks
offer
that
it,
see housing
prevents
as another
most
commodity. It can
petty,
be bought up,
ridiculous
it can be shifted,
criminal
it can be
acts
moved
from
around.
young minors.
Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house.
I own one
So
house
when
right
I
now.
think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the vice president is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is
No, they're taking
you don't
down
have to
notes
pay the down
to,
payment.
yeah, I mean, prove the
Those
other
are things that
person's
make it that no,
misled
you're gonna pay it
facts.
back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are
So far,
things that
Tim
we
Walz
know
has
in the
called
long
out
run, the
Vance a
appreciated
lot
value
more than
that
Vance has
generates
called out
from
Walz,
wealth
which
that's created from
proves.
it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some
Someone
common
said
ground
in
but we
big
can't
chat,
blame,
this is the most kindest Midwest
immigrants for
debate
the
ever.
reason that's not the case.
I
It's
couldn't
happening
agree
in many
more.
cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position,
Well,
the
I'm not sick
promise
from
is
watching
to
Vance,
seize
but
federal
I
lands to
can
build homes,
see that he's just
remove
trying to
regulation,
sugarcoat
provide
Trumpism
tax
and
breaks, and
sugarcoat
cut back on immigration,
the whole
which
thing's
you said
behind Trump.
pushes
So
up
everyone's
prices.
seeing him as what
Where are
he's
you
trying to
gonna build
paint.
all all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all,
A Russian comment.
Tim
What
just
the?
said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for
Yeah,
higher
here he is
housing prices,
sugarcoating
but
it
we
again.
do want to blame
I mean, I
Kamala
like that he's
Harris for letting
sugarcoating.
in millions of illegal aliens into this
Pass the
country,
bill.
which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million
Tim
illegal
wants like
aliens compete
a
with
little
Americans
shot
for
right there, like
scarce
pass
homes
the
is one of
bill.
the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change?
Interesting
the
to dump
equation
all
for
that on
American
Kamala
citizens
Harris.
if you lower energy prices, as Donald Trump said.
It's actually the mortgage
JD
companies.
Vance,
I've been
one
hit
of
by
the
mortgage
biggest drivers
companies,
of
insurance
housing costs
companies,
aside from
not
illegal
the
immigration, is think about
Biden
it. If a
administration.
truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build a house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods too.
Senator Vance, you
Yeah,
still have
Walz.
23 seconds there. Do you want to answer
Can I have it?
where? Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But Senator, where are you going to seize the
Trying to
federal
take
lands?
his
Can you
23
clarify?
seconds.
Well, what Donald Trump is saying is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in.
Well, of course, that's not
migrants,
true. And again,
and that
you
it's
have the
affecting
facts. I
housing
guess we
prices.
agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's again blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask though on this question: are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now,
Yeah.
Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal land.
Native
I know in the western
Americans?
part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor,
Where's
your
the study?
time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the
That's
federal
not happening,
regulations? I
though.
deal with this as a
I don't know what
governor.
people are thinking that's
You can
happening.
very quickly reply.
I'm sorry.
Giving away housing?
I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. That in some cases, many of those are local. Many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, I have concepts of a plan. Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. It's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs,
a 900-page
for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. You think about healthcare, you go into a hospital,
yes, the 900-page bill, comment section agrees, and I thought about that too. That's Project 2025's full literal page, 900 pages.
We talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think it's an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump
is ready for
has
the
ever
rebuttal.
said
He's got
or
his
ever
notes.
done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better healthcare policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered
why
than they
is
have before.
JD Vance smirking?
This is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to
go back. He's smirking
the first thing he
somewhat.
On day one
He's got that smile.
On day one,
oh my
he tried
gosh.
to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court.
What's another word for a national minimum standard?
The ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill.
Or 12 weeks.
Now,
What
fast
happens to
forward, what that
abortion
means to you
after
is
those weeks?
you lose your pre-existing
It gets
condition.
banned.
If you're sitting
So
at home and
he
you
can
can't
use all
walk,
of
too
these,
bad. If you're a woman,
these
probably
rhetorical
not.
devices
Broke
that
your
he
foot
wants to
during
use to try and
football,
frame
might
himself
kick you
as
out.
not
Your
advocating
kids
for
get
an
kicked out
abortion
when they're
ban,
26.
but
Kamala
honestly,
Harris
that's not going to
negotiated
work
drug
on
prices for the
anybody who
first
has
time with
some
Medicare.
sense.
We have
Another
10
point
drugs that will
that
come
I think is
online,
worth bringing
the most
up
common ones that will be
is-
there. But
and
look,
this is where I think
this
is gonna be
issue,
one of the most telling
and when
parts
Donald
of
Trump
this debate
said,
unto itself
I got a
is
concept of a plan, it
the
cracked
moderators
me
offered
up as
some
a fourth grade
minor
teacher because
fact
my
check,
kids would
just
have never given me
clarifying
that.
the status
But what
of
Senator
the
Vance just
migrants
explained
in
might be worse than a
Springfield, Ohio,
concept.
is that they
Because
had
what he
legal
explained is
immigrants that
pre-Obamacare.
they had
And I'll make this
protected
as simple as
status.
possible
And
because
JD Vance
I have
lost his
done this
mind
for a
and
long
complained
time.
about the fact that
What they're
there was
saying is,
fact-checking
if you're
during the
healthy,
debate.
why
And
should you be
whined
paying more?
that, oh, if
So
there's
what they're
no
going to do is
fact-checking,
let
he gets more
insurance
time.
companies
In
pick
other
who
words,
they insure because
his-
guess what happens?
his
You pay
entire
your premium, it's
strategy,
not
his
mine.
position is
They're figured they're not going to
predicated
have to
solely
pay
on
out to
being
you.
able to lie
But
without
those of you a
pushback,
little older, gray,
where
got
if
cancer,
there is
you're
some
going to get
pushback,
kicked out
if
of
there
it.
is somebody
That's why
holding
the
him
system
accountable for
didn't
his
work.
lies,
Kamala
he has
Harris
to,
will
he melts
protect
down
and
because that
enhance
goes
the
against his
ACA.
stated strategy.
Yes.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet
Nicely
explained
delivered.
how you
Strategy is
protect people
expressly
with pre-existing
created
conditions or
so
laid
as
out
to
that
allow
plan.
you to lie
Well,
within
look, we
the
currently
Yeah, Vance.
have
Say
laws and
about the
regulations
message
in
that you're
place
trying to send,
right now that
that you are
protect people
so
with
willing to
pre-existing
lie, that when
conditions.
somebody
We want to
blocks
keep those
you,
regulations in
somebody
place, but we also want
impedes
to make
your
the health
ability
insurance
to lie,
marketplace
to
function a
allow
little bit better.
disinformation
Now,
to
what Governor
spew
Walz just
freely,
said
that
is
you then
actually not
melt
true.
down
A
as the
lot of
result
what
of that.
happened
That
and the
should,
reason
like,
that
hit dog
Obamacare
will
was
holler,
crushing under its
right?
own
That should
weight
be
is that a
the
lot
full
of young and
implication
healthy
that
people were
what JD
leaving the
Vance is doing
exchanges.
here.
Donald
Not
Trump
acting in good
actually
faith.
helped
He is
address
not,
that problem, and he
offering
did
any
so in a
truthful,
way that preserved people's access to
testimony
coverage
here.
who
He is
had
just
pre-existing
trying to lie
conditions.
with
But
impunity.
again,
That is what his entire
it's
strategy
something that these
So
guys
he's just
do
repeating
is they
pre-existing
make a
conditions,
lot of
but he's not
claims
actually
about if Donald Trump becomes
saying what he's
president,
going to do
all
about
of
it.
his
It's just
climate
there's been a
consequences
lot of
are gonna
claims.
ensue. But in reality,
Tim Walz is
Donald Trump's
agreeing.
president, inflation was low, take-home pay was higher, and he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job,
Yeah.
which is govern
I agree.
in a bipartisan way and get results, not just
But
complain
the
about
comment
problems,
section.
but actually solve them.
Governor, did
Reshoring
enrollment
American
under the
manufacturing.
Affordable Care Act go up
Does
under
anybody
the
know
Trump
how many
administration?
manufacturing jobs
It's higher
Kamala
now
Harris
than we've seen it go up.
and
Look,
Joe
people are
Biden
using it.
created?
The system works. And
800,000.
the question
Anybody know how
about this
many
of young people or
manufacturing
whatever,
jobs
that's the
Donald
individual
Trump
mandate piece of
created in
this.
his
And Republicans
Lost
fought tooth and nail
150,000.
saying,
So if
well,
we're talking
Americans should
about
be free to
both
do
of
this.
these
Well, then what
candidates'
happened is
records
individual
on the
mandate's a
issue
good idea.
of reshoring manufacturing
I think the
jobs,
idea of
you
making
can
sure
go
the risk pool is
negative
broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only
150,000
way
for
insurance
Donald
works.
Trump, or
When it doesn't, it collapses. You are
800,000 for
asking
Joe Biden.
pre-ACA where
I'm
we get
really
people
bad at
out.
math,
Look,
but I'm pretty sure I know which one of those two
that
is
they need to
bigger.
be on health care.
And then producing
People
as much
expect
energy as
it
possible.
to be there,
We are
and when
more
we are
energy
able to make it, and we
independent
are making it this
now
way,
than ever been.
when we
We are more
incentivize people to be in the
energy
market,
now
when
than
we
we were
help
under
people
Donald
who
Trump.
might not be
So
able
this
to afford it
notion
get there,
that we need
and
to
we
bring
make
in
sure
Donald
then,
Trump to
when you
produce
get
more
sick and
energy
old, it's there for
ignores the
you.
fact
Because
that
I heard
right now
people say,
under
well,
Joe
I
Biden,
don't want to buy into
more
Medicare or
energy
whatever.
than
Good
Donald
luck
Trump
buying
himself.
health care once
The
you get
worst
past
thing, look,
70. So
even
look,
I
the
don't
ACA
agree
works.
with
We
the
can
fact that
continue
we
to
are
do better. Kamala Harris
creating
did
as
that.
much,
The way she made
fracking as
everything
much
better
oil as we are.
was
Even I don't agree with
negotiating
this,
those 10
but it
drugs
doesn't
on
change
Medicare
the
for the
reality
first
that we
time in
are.
American history.
Thank
You
you.
may have
Margaret?
a debate back
I
here.
apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in
Families.
America.
Yeah.
There is a
Okay, we're gonna take a
crisis in this country.
Child-
And the United States is one of
catch
the
you guys
very
in the next
few
break.
developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents.
All right.
Governor Walz, you've said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The family works better. We stay in their employers. We get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota, and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the
Comments
issue.
in advance
Those
looks
big
like a
companies are able to offer
used
it.
cologne
Those of you
deodorant.
out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer
Mm.
or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave
Okay,
program?
Vance.
And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn?
Comment section's already hitting them because they've already
First
seen
of all,
this.
A number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats too have worked on this issue, and I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I
Waltz is
speak from
agreeing.
this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who's an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator, and I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of child care model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with child care. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote child care because, look, it is unacceptable. And, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Well said.
Senator,
well said, Vance.
Thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals.
I'm actually doing pretty good listening to JD Vance, even though, yeah, it's pretty much like a drone. It's like, yeah.
$3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised. Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarship types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, You're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, if those members of Congress,
Yeah, I agree.
can't believe they're not. When I go to
Tim Walz
businesses,
is agreeing
sure, they'll
with
talk about
Vance a
taxes
bit
sometimes,
too much.
but they will lead with childcare. and
Very
they will lead
nice,
with
cordial
housing,
Minnesota
because we know the
father,
problem is, especially in a
being
state
a little
like
too
Minnesota,
friendly,
we need more workers
deflecting,
because our economy's growing,
yeah.
but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy. The
Okay,
top
state of
issue for
democracy.